Leviticus in the time of the COVID virus 2020. Leviticus has not been, I will admit, my go-to book. It's a bit turgid. It's a legal code, fundamentally. It's a bit like reading all the terms and conditions of something before you get to the main event. The book name comes from the priestly tribe of Levi, who were one of the 12 tribes of Israel. The Old Hebrew name, Law of Priests, summarises the contents quite well. It was written and modified over a long period of time, and we reckon it reached its present form about 600 to 300 years before Jesus. It is presented as being in the time of journeying to the Promised Land, establishing the rules for the new society the Israelites were setting up. They were a wandering tribe, nomads, runaways from Egypt, and now they had to sort out the rules, the terms and conditions for how to run a society. It seems a long time ago and a very alien book, but it has many things to tell us. If, for example, in these days of a virus, you have symptoms and we go to the NHS, a doctor, an expert, will do an analysis and you may be put in quarantine for some time. And we find here in chapter 13, skin diseases, various sorts, yeah? The priest decides, based on symptoms, he may put you in quarantine for 7 days and examine you again. Luckily, now, despite the NHS being under so much pressure, it doesn't just ignore you for 7 days. The original Hebrew title of this third book of the law is taken from the very first words. Yahweh summoned Moses, and it takes from that, and he called is the exact Jewish phrase, Hebrew phrase. And it calls to mind this vocation to which our staff now in the healthcare service and the priests in the olden days were called to. In chapter 8, we read about how these priests were to be investitured, and in 9 we see them taking up their functions, rather different roles from what the NHS workers are doing today, but again specialised and set apart from the rest of society. Also relevant today is chapter 11 and onwards, for example, where it talks about the rules concerning the clean and the unclean, clean and unclean animals on the land, birds, winged insects, and more importantly, contact with unclean animals. These rules look a little bit strange to us, but this is before modern germ theory. However, they do get some bits right. For example, if unclean animals, for example, touch water, that water is also considered contaminated. In chapter 13, for example, we have another insight into how things are today. Contamination of clothing, here with mould or mildew, when it would be burnt. In our day, we worry about the clothes of healthcare workers and making sure that they do not contaminate others on public transport and are washed at high temperature. There's one area where we would nowadays disagree with Leviticus, the scapegoat. Here in 16, they talk about taking 2 goats, one to be sacrificed to Yahweh and the other sent out into the desert where this Azazel, a demon, lives. And it's very easy to nowadays to cast the guilt onto someone else, something else, and send it out of our society. It's very easy to blame, for example, foreigners, to blame the Chinese, or to blame somebody else's military research institute. That's very easy. We have to get over that. And the whole of the rest of the Bible, especially the New Testament, is all about coming to understand the inclusiveness of God. But there is one thing we can learn, particularly from Leviticus. Chapter 25, the Year of Jubilee. Not everybody is able to cope. Some people labour under heavy debt, then as now. And so here we see the old solution. Every 7 times 7 years, 49 years, you were to cancel the debts. And this is called the Year of Jubilee. And all property was to be returned. Land was redeemed. Slaves are redeemed. There's specific discussions about what to do with land, whether it's in houses, whether it's in walled or unwalled properties. All these technical details, a little bit like we have today. Also, a little bit like how you have today. When we get into the detail, there's things that have to be clarified. For example, modern Jewish tradition as a controversy whether this happened every 49 years, 7 times 7, or whether it happened the following year, in other words, the 50th year. So as is typical for government pronouncements today, the discussion is about the detail. But Leviticus ends on a high note. These are the orders which Yahweh gave to Moses on Mount Sinai for the Israelites. And why was that? That was because God was leading his people into the promised land. After all this worrying about skin disease and clean and unclean, we see it is for a greater purpose. Their present worries will pass. Our present worries will pass. And we too should keep our minds fixed firmly on the promised land ahead. Amen.